So humor is one of the quickest ways to get rapport and trust right up front.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in New York City.
People go, oh, I get her. I understand her. She makes me feel comfortable. She makes me feel less alone.
Happy holidays. We are celebrating with an uplifting conversation with a preacher, lawyer, stand-up comedian, and motorcycle riding author. And they're all one person. The Reverend Susan Sparks is senior pastor at Madison Avenue Baptist Church in New York City, and we'll be talking about joy in difficult times, laughing in church, what inspires us, and Susan's books, including Laugh Your Way to Grace and Miracle on 31st Street. We are growing the State of Belief, building on our 18-year history by partnering with Religion News Service. And as part of the RNS family of podcasts, there's a next generation, the State of Belief podcast, that I want to make sure you're subscribed to. Please visit stateofbelief.com/new podcast. It would really help us to have you subscribe, rate, and tell people you're close to about all that you are hearing. The State of Belief is made possible in great part by the generous support of our listeners. If you've made a donation, thank you for helping get these conversations heard by more people who need them. If you haven't pitched in yet, information on how you can help keep this show going is available at stateofbelief.com, and you can find out more about the work of Interfaith Alliance and join us at interfaithalliance.org. And now to my guest. When things look grim as they do right now on many fronts, it can seem inappropriate to seek out reasons to laugh, and yet few things can equip us for rising to challenges like joy and laughter. And so I am genuinely happy to introduce Reverend Susan Sparks, who is a preacher, a lawyer, and a stand-up comedian who is the author of Laugh Your Way to Grace and Miracle on 31st Street. She is the senior pastor of Madison Avenue Baptist Church in New York City, a best-selling author who says her mission is to change the world one smile at a time. That's what I need. Susan, welcome to the State of Belief.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. I think that's it.
I think we've done it. I think we've done it. Listen, but what people don't know is that you are the senior minister at the church that ordained me. Yes. We have history.
Yes.
We have history. The Madison Avenue Baptist Church is the church that went out of their way, I will say, to say, you may be called at a time when I didn't even know what that meant. I mean, it's really like, for me, Madison Avenue Baptist is like my alma mater in a way, like really the home of my soul, the mother of my soul. I mean, really, a really important place. It's not a huge church. It's not a mega church, but it's a church where everybody matters, where everybody belongs. I mean, I talk about your Madison Avenue Baptist Church all the time as a place that is emblematic for me of what a church can be. So you're the senior pastor. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Paul. Thank you. Given the circumstances, I think we're all pretty exhausted about this point in time. I mean, part of it's COVID, part of it is the season, and part of it is the world and the headlines.
The world and the headlines. And so let's talk a little bit about your background, because you may have a little bit of an accent that comes out in certain moments. And you certainly, there are certain moments when your accent does come out, and it may be when you're wearing your cowboy boots or riding your motorcycle, which she also does, people. This is an amazing woman, Susan Sparks. So tell me about your background and how you went from growing up and then becoming a lawyer. And then when I intersected you, you were beginning to look at your call to ministry.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. And one thing I just want to share with your listeners, I'm in the sanctuary of my church. So I hope the sound is coming through clearly, but if it sounds like I'm in a giant cathedral, I'm in a tiny cathedral.
You're in a tiny cathedral, but you sound very holy.
Oh,
right?
Look,
and extra pious. So
that was the goal. So good. Yes, you did pick up on an accent. I'm from North Carolina originally. And, my call to ministry started really early. Somewhere around like age 5 or 6, I thought I wanted to be a preacher, and I was taking all my stuffed animals and shoving them in the corner on Saturday nights and telling them Bible stories because I knew it was going to be better than what the Gandalf out of Lord of the Rings looking guy was going to preach the next day. So the thing is that I came out of a very conservative Southern Baptist church that does not, to this day, ordain women. And so I remember telling my Sunday school teacher that I wanted to be a preacher. And this woman, God rest her soul, she, unbeknownst to the church, smoked a lot of unfiltered cigarettes and drank some bourbon. So she was just like sounding sort of like Sam Elliott. So when I told her I wanted to be a preacher, she was like, darling, that's not going to happen.
Oh my God.
6, you don't really know how to argue that point. So bottom line, I thought, okay, well, that's not a career choice. Where else can I go? Fast forward 20 years later, I'm a lawyer because it's the same job, just different clients, really.
Right.
Right. So I practiced law for about 10 years, but all through that time of practice, that call kept coming back. And that girl who loved, it was kind of a little comedian at heart, was a storyteller, wanted to be a preacher, kept coming back. And I also realized that those good old boys were great at comedy. So I started studying stand-up as I was a trial lawyer because I realized juries, people really resonated with humor. But finally that call came back and I realized that I couldn't ignore it any longer. So I jumped ship, went to New York, went to Union Seminary. That's where we crossed paths and found Madison and never looked back.
Isn't it amazing? I mean, this is, I want to give a shout out to a pastor who isn't famous, but his name is Mike Easterling and his wife, Jerry. And I tell you, Mike took chances with a lot of us. And he was a Baptist minister, tall, straight, good looking. And he brought in, and I'm going to include you in this list, a cast of misfits who thought, he said, I see something in you. I'm going to give you a chance. And, I had, invitations to like the Unitarians and others. And he said, oh, you're going to be able to do everything at Madison Avenue Baptist. I was like, what? This is the craziest idea I've ever heard. And anyway, I just want to give a shout out because he was the pastor of Madison Avenue Baptist before you. And then you are definitely his very, very worthy successor. But let's get into a little bit about like, comedy. I remember when you were like going to comedy classes while at Union and like doing these things simultaneously. And by the way, like, it's all very nice and good to, be funny. It's a different thing to be a comedian. And so like that is an intentional, it's like a setup of a sermon. This is like, it takes work, it takes intentionality, and the goal is to bring levity. So talk about how comedy is incorporated within your call to ministry.
I mean, to me, comedy is maybe one of the most powerful tools that we have, honestly. And there's so many different levels of it. I mean, I think one is just basically it breaks us open and helps us see life in a fresh new way. And that includes worship. We can just get rote about how we come at spirituality or church or synagogue or mosque or whatever way we approach God. And I mean, I have to think about a billboard my husband and I saw, Toby. We were driving through the Twin Cities a couple of years ago. And at the top, it said Minnesota Cremation Society. Okay, which is just strange that they would even advertise, right? And underneath that, it had a photograph of a casket. And underneath that, it said, think outside the box, which I was like, there it is. Hilarious.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
But it's all about the laughing and breaking open and seeing things in a fresh new way. But I think another big piece that humor brings that we don't think about all the time is forgiveness and kind of empathy. I've said many times, if you can laugh at yourself, you can forgive yourself. And if you can forgive yourself, you can forgive others. And so that's kind of, many world religious traditions squished together in kind of two phrases, but it is about us being able to forgive ourselves and look out and feel that connection, to others. And so I think that's a big one. But the third one, I think the biggest is building bridges. And that's why I'm on this, as you know, Laugh and Peace tour. Since 9/11, actually, I've been on a comedy tour with a rabbi and a Muslim comic. And we traveled all over the world together. in all types of venues, religious, secular, educational, nonprofit, whatever. And the whole idea is we put our stories on stage and our kind of life experiences through humor, and the audience sees how they overlap. They crisscross. Maybe we all have an aunt that drives us crazy, or maybe, we all hate going to the DMV, or there's a food that we each enjoy, or there's music that we like. And it's all about just finding common ground, which is something we so desperately need. And humor helps us do that because, if we laugh together, you and I share something right then.
That's right.
Because we both understand the premise of the joke.
Yeah.
So,
well, you have this book, Laugh Your Way to Grace. I think what you're talking about is some of that, especially around just seeing the world in a different way and realizing you don't have to keep going the same way. And if laughter can kind of allow you to have fun, and to see your life in a different way. I'm just flashing on something my great grandfather Walter Raushenbush said. He said, the only thing I could never laugh at was my deafness. He was deaf, and he went deaf, and he was it alienated him so much, and he was never out because he was like, he liked to have fun. And I felt sad about that, that he said that I could never find the humor in it. And, I don't want to point a finger and say, well, that's because you had a lack of imagination or whatever. But it just points to it's a case in point of what you're saying. Had he been able to find something, or maybe if he had met Reverend Susan Sparks and figured out a way to find something that could be humorous about it, it would have lessened the power it had over him.
I love that you brought that up, Paul, and I'm sorry he felt that way. Completely understandable, though. But I'll give you an example. I have a friend who runs a group called Cracking Up. And this friend is a psychotherapist as well as a comedian, and he teaches people who are struggling with severe mental health issues stand up. So they are able to get on stage and talk about their experience where even in therapeutic settings, it's been difficult, but they do it through stand up, and the audience bonds with them in that moment. And it is incredibly powerful to claim that pain and then share it and be able to laugh with each other about it. So I love people should check it out. It's called Cracking Up.
Well, and also I just, you can talk as much about this as you want, but, life hasn't been overly easy for you every day. You've had your own struggles, and you've had your, and in some ways, like, church is the place where we feel like we can bring our deepest pain, but then we feel like sometimes we have to, kind of massage that pain and be solemn around that pain and and treat it with kid gloves and never allow it to maybe, be as, crack open as high as the ceilings of the church are. So I'm curious, like, for yourself, I mean, how has humor been a part of your own healing from what the things that you've been going through?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. That's a lovely question. I think from a spiritual perspective, over the years, I've realized that humor is, it's really all about a holistic approach to worship, because as you just described, I think we tend to check our laughter at the door of our houses of worship like we check our codes. We're going to bring in the pain and the resentment and the anger and the fear, all that, welcome. But the laughter, not so much. And the I've realized for my own self, you can't ask God to heal you unless you give God all the pieces. And so in our services, we encourage people to bring everything to the altar, whatever it is, however painful or joyful or funny or scary. It comes in and it goes on the altar. And I mean, I'm a breast cancer survivor myself. And it was in those kind of personal experiences for me that I realized that humor is not only a physical healing tool, when you breathe in and you laugh, that lowers blood pressure, increases heart and lung function, but it's a psychological healer too. I mean, if you could stand in a place of pain, a place of fear, a place of not knowing, and look that issue in the eye and laugh, find a place, a way to laugh, it's like you're saying to it, you may defeat me, but you won't define me. And I think in that moment, that laughter is that place that just grounds us and makes us stand a little straighter and a little taller. And I'm sure people listening have had those experiences, whether it's going through a medical crisis or a personal crisis. I mean, let's call it out. The place where laughter is maybe most healing is at funerals.
Oh, right.
May I share a story? Do we have time for me to share a quick?
Yes, please, please.
There's a woman in our congregation, Paul, you know her, but I will not name the names to keep the innocent protected. But this was my first funeral down in Staten Island. I go in, it was open casket. I was asked to pray over the person who'd passed away. She was a person that would never leave the house without perfect hair and makeup. So I reach in the casket, touch this person's arm, my arm around the daughter that was there. And the second I touched this person's arm, I was like, ow! Which is not a pastoral thing to do, at a funeral. Anyway, long story short, I come to find out inside her sleeve was a box of hair color. And they told me, we were scared Mama wouldn't have her hair color on the other side. So we decided to bury her with Miss Clairol 5A1C3.
Oh, wow.
Just, of course, melted down with laughter. And we laughed and laughed. And then those tears of laughter morphed into tears of mourning for losing this. And then somebody told another funny story, and it went back to laughter of joy. So, it's the seamless healing of grief in that moment that I bet many people that are listening have experienced.
Yeah, God, I've definitely felt that. And I'll just confess that I was a church laugher. Like, I would crack up in church, and I would be there and just dying of like giggles and like not being able to like handle it. And it was like I was suffocating because I was just, something would set me off. And I think like, just being, because I remember those moments and I shared so many of them with my siblings, like it's one of my favorite parts of church. But I just love what you do. You have a book called Miracle on 31st Street, and we're kind of in the holiday season, in the Christmas season for the Christian community. Talk to me a little bit about that book that you have, and for those who don't know, of course, you and I know, is that Madison Avenue Baptist Church is on 31st Street in Madison. And I will give a pitch because you guys have great social media, because you have a great sign in front that is used for often. Now, often very serious stuff, but often for very funny things. So if you're going by Madison and 31st in New York City, you've got to check this out. This church out. Talk to me about this book, The Miracle on 31st Street. What was the reason for writing that, and what were some of the miracles you'd like to talk about?
Well, thank you, Paul. I've got to back up for a second, though, and share a couple of signs out, because thank you for bringing that up. It's on social media, but also if you're ever walking past our church, you'll see just signs that make you think, signs that make you laugh. I mean, this is the face of the church, and this says more about Madison than anything. So, like, for example, one of our signs was the reason people get lost in thought is because it's unfamiliar territory. One said, what happens in Vegas is forgiven here. My favorite all-time one was honk if you love Jesus, text while driving if you want to meet him.
Woo. These are good. Go ahead.
I love that one.
Yeah, right. Now, to just quickly, tell us your social media handles so that people can, if they want, follow Madison Avenue Baptist Church. And if you're in New York, I assume you are welcome, just as Madison Avenue Baptist was when I was there. Welcome to everyone to come in. There is no litmus test about any one thing to come into that church. Really, when Madison Avenue Baptist says you all are welcome, really all are welcome. But what are your social media handles?
We're on Facebook, Instagram, and it's at Madison Avenue Baptist.
Great.
Yes, and so those are the ones. Thank you for asking about the book. The Miracle on 31st Street started out as kind of a collection for Advent. So one meditation a day for the 4 themes of Advent, as you know, hope, peace. I have to think through it as I'm going through. What's the day? Hope, peace, joy, and love. And so there's, 6 or 7 segments for each one as you travel through Advent. But what became clear to me is it's not just a Christmas book or an Advent book or a holiday book. It's really for joy any time of the year. So that's why I call it Miracle on 31st Street. I think it's Grinch to gratitude any time of the year. Kind of thing.
Good.
One of it's all kind of humorous approaches to serious topics, which is my preaching method. And I'll give you one example. There's one of my favorite ones is the story of Mary riding the donkey up to Bethlehem, and the idea that she's what, she's about to have a baby. So she's like 8 months and 99 and to a hundredths pregnant, ready to go. And she looks at this donkey and thinks, oh my gosh, and straight up the mountainside where she's got to go. So the thought that went through Mary's head is, am I going to ride this thing or not? And so the whole piece is about things in life where we're faced with things we don't want to do. We don't want to deal with. And some of them are things we have choices about. So we say no. We learn to say no. But some of them are things we don't have choices about. Maybe it's a cancer diagnosis. Maybe it's a child in crisis. It could be a divorce. It could be so many things. And in that case, we look to Mary, who gave us two really important things to do. Number one, find a lot of padding, however you find that in your life. And number two, pray. I'm sure she was going up that mountainside. She was counting every little hair on the mane of that donkey going, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord.
Listen, I remember being on a donkey going down the Grand Canyon, being like, this is it. I'm not going to make it here. And so I love, but I think this is the wonderful gift of comedy and alongside like real faith lessons and real lessons of life. I have to say, like, one of the reasons I just admire you so much is like you shatter stereotypes of what a pastor is supposed to be. You're a woman, you're a comedian, but also you're a motorcycle rider. And I believe, at least at one point, I don't know if you're still doing it, you had a blessing of the motorcycles. Is that still happening?
We haven't had one in a while. It's a little hard in COVID,
Yeah, right. Well, what was that? What was that? I just, because you're a motorcycle rider and we have the blessing of the animals and all that. And I just love the idea. It's like, go to where people are, go to what is the reality of their life and find ways to bless that.
We closed off Madison, the far right lane of Madison. The police were very kind in letting us do that. And people brought their bikes and just lined them up in front of the church. And so we had a service that was all biker themed. We had a biker themed sermon. And then afterwards we went outside and I did a blessing for each bike of just, I asked what people wanted to be blessed. What did they need? And then just offered a blessing of safety and enjoyment for their bike. It was awesome. We're not the only ones that have thought this up. It's been done before, but in New York City, maybe not so much.
It is a wonderful gift. Now, I do want to ask you, to maybe just give us a taste of a few jokes. Is that can you ask a comedian for jokes? It's kind of like asking a pastor for a sermon. But any jokes that you've really liked that are killing out there in the circuit that you do want to share with our listeners?
Well, thank you, Paul. That is kind of scary to be asked as a comedian. You're like, what's working? I don't know. But I'm actually more of a storyteller as just a joke. But my whole thing is talking about being a Southerner in New York. And so I talk about things that are jarringly different, like even just food shopping. Like, people up here go to these fancy sounding grocery stores like Zabar's, and you hear people say things like, can I serve white truffle chev with quail? You don't hear that where I grew up. Last time I went shopping down in North Carolina, I was at the Piggly Wiggly store, and the woman next to me was like, do you think I can serve Velveeta with that back? You can. But it's more of kind of, experiential things that are different up here. And people love kale up here, Paul. Do you eat kale? I don't know if you eat kale.
I've become a kale eater. I have to say, I'm on that. When it's, I will not go out of my way to buy kale, but when it's at a restaurant, I have not been adverse to buying a kale salad.
I tell you, I am in awe because I've tried everything. I've tried to bake it. I've tried to eat it on salads. I even tried to fry it. And we all know if you fry something and that thing's not better, that thing is evil.
Wow, you've heard it here first. Pastor Sparks has claimed kale evil. I think that may be the most controversial thing that we're hearing today. Up next, more with Susan Sparks, and I'll have some personal thoughts for this special time of the year. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. And make sure you subscribe to the Next Generation podcast at stateofbelief.com/new podcast. That's stateofbelief.com/new podcast. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.
I'm Roxy Stone.
And I'm Caitlin Beatty.
Saved by the City is a podcast from two Christian women cracking the code of faith from the mean streets of New York City.
Our podcast captures what happens when purity culture meets hookup culture, when distraction steals from devotion, and when the diversity of viewpoints and lifestyles clash against assumptions.
Gotham can be a weird place for Christian women, but we're out there, and we have stories to tell.
Saved by the City, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
As far as your preaching goes, because one of your books is really aimed at preachers about bringing humor into the pulpit. What are some of the things that you recommend? I mean, I think every listener out there who goes to a church or a synagogue or any sort is like, oh, I hope that someone listens to this lady and get some humor in there. But what are some things that you recommend preachers or people who want to give a good spiritual message, but want to inject some humor into it? What are some ideas or suggestions?
Well, what I frame it in the book around what I call the 10 commandments of comedy, what I have learned as a comedian that's relevant to preaching. And frankly, it's relevant to just about everything. I teach it to lawyers, I teach it to business people, but one of the main ones is edit. Please get to the point. You know, down south, we have a saying that sermons like biscuits improve with shortening, right? But it is all about editing, and that's what stand-up is about. People hear comedians and they think, oh, it's all off the cuff. Some might be, most is scripted. And it's scripted to the point where all the extraneous materials is taken away so that you have the core, like a short setup and a punch. The longer the setup, the bigger the punchline has to be. Same for sermons, same for messages. I mean, the perfect example is getting an email that is 16 pages long. Oh my goodness, this is so funny. Read this. And then it might be funny at the end, but you're so exhausted, you're on the floor and you can't laugh. So yeah, the whole thing is get to the point. People are listening, not reading. They need a one-line summary to take away. And that's what you've got to cut to. So I think editing is big. There's a chapter I talk about speaking, preaching as an EKG, you know, like the electromagnetic tracking we do of our heart. There's a spike and then it drops, and a spike and it drops. In comedy, most comedians hit punchlines maybe 10 to 12 a minute.
Oh, wow.
Thank goodness, as preachers, we don't have that high bar, but you need to track human attention, which unfortunately is about 4 minutes, you know, studies. So a change might be something funny. It also might be a story, a statistic, you know, a scripture, a change in voice, movement, whatever. But as a comedian, you know, you've got to keep people's attention like that. Right. And the third thing, and I'll share, and that just, there's 10, but I'll give you 3, is how people don't realize humor is a powerful vehicle for social justice. I use humor to help open the door to preach hard topics. And, you know, for example, I preach in a lot of more conservative churches outside of Madison. And if I want to go and do, say, a sermon on race relations, to make people comfortable, I will lean into a story like there's a parade in southern Minnesota called the Standstill Parade. True, believe it or not, it's there. And it's because all the fire trucks and the majorettes and the Shriners are parked by the side of the road and the crowd walks by. It's just so crazy, right? But everybody laughs. They think it's fun. You hear the story. You can see people's shoulders relax. They sit back. There's trust. There's rapport. Then you start taking that refrain, it's our time to move. And you start easing into more difficult topics, things that would otherwise make people uncomfortable if they got hit with it straight. But they need to trust you first. So humor is one of the quickest ways, especially as a trial lawyer. I realized that, to get rapport and trust right up front. People go, oh, I get her. I understand her. She makes me feel comfortable. She makes me feel less alone. So very, very important tool that we think about humor as something that would gloss difficult topics. No, it breaks the door open to help us get to them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even what you do with the tour, what is it? Laughter Peace Tour? What is it? No,
Laugh and peace.
Laugh in Peace. I mean, I think that is an example of using what you know how to do and leveraging it for good. And I'm just curious if in this time, and by this time you know that I'm referencing all of the world's trials, but especially for those of us who care about interfaith relations and those of us who believe in this, in this sanctity of all life and have deep relationships with the Muslim community, with the Jewish community, and with broader communities. In this time where there's just so much division and hostility, which is resulting in, real spikes in anti-Semitism, Islamophobia on this country. Have you? I don't want to. You're not here to solve that. No one's got this right. But I am curious if you have been thinking about that with your colleagues, or if there's anything in the works that you might be doing to try to bring people together in this terrible moment, using laughter, which in a time when it feels like no one feels like laughing.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Paul. I think, yes, there's conversations going on all the time about this, and it's all about, again, trying to find common ground. You have to start with something that everyone agrees on. And maybe, sometimes that's been food, where we gather people together and talk about, have a dinner or a gathering where people bring their favorite foods, and that bonds people. And then you move on to something that may be less familiar. Kids bring people together. Our hope for our children brings people together. Music, even pain. I did a piece one time about how cancer does not discriminate between Republican and Democrat. This is something we all share. And I have to lean back into our tour. Bob and we've worked with multiple Muslim comics. They're brilliant at telling their stories in a way that people can hear, but hit hard with a message. Here's one. Azhar Usman, one of our comedians out of Chicago, talked about rolling up to a light. This was about 6-7 years ago. He goes to a light, and here comes a pickup truck that comes in right beside him, and this was in Illinois. And Azhar, he dresses as a traditional Muslim man, and he has a long beard, and he, saw these guys motioning for him to roll down the window. He rolls down the window, and one of the guys, 2 white guys, young guys, leans out and goes, "What's up, Osama?" And then the other guy leans around his friend and goes, "What's going on, Gandhi?" And Oscar calls it out in the moment. He goes, "What does that even mean? Can we just stop a minute? I'm being simultaneously called Osama bin Laden and Gandhi. Like, is that something like, I'm going to kill you by not eating?"
But non-violently.
Right, just leaning into the truth and horror of that story. But then when you take it to its natural conclusion, it's frankly hilarious and tragic. So it helps people to laugh at it and step back and go, whoa, yeah, okay, this is just ignorant because of the facts and the actual logic of it, as opposed to bringing it back personally. So yeah, to me, that's where this is going to be. This is about sharing stories. This is about sharing things that we find in common. And maybe it's just finding what are our hopes for the future. And once we establish that, where we have something in common, then we go something to something more. And we take tiny baby steps at a time off that.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I like to offer that as an ending to all of these shows, is like, what brings people hope? And I'm curious, what brings you hope right now?
The kids in our services, I have to tell you. We have this beautiful collection of children. And sometimes, I actually said in the sermon on Sunday, the theme was hope. And I got up there and I was like, I just want to tell y'all this is a hard sermon to write, because today's theme is hope. And unless you live somewhere like, say, Oz, this is a hard sermon to write. And in the midst of that moment of me saying it was hard, one of our kids comes screaming down the aisle, wow, 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 just laughing her head off with like gum. stretched out of her mouth. And she's like 2.5. And the whole place broke up laughing. And there was just this moment of maybe there's hope here. And I think we just, all of us watch what's going on. And as people of faith, we have hope. We are told to have hope. We are given sources for hope. As human beings, it's tough right now. And I have to say, I struggle with it in my own life. Is there really hope now to be had? And when I really am not completely clear, I lean back into the kids and just watch them for a few minutes, and the way that they interact with each other, no matter what the skin color, no matter what the religion, no matter what the ethnicity, no matter what their stance on environmental issues, they're playing, they're laughing, they're hugging on each other. And I just think if we can protect them and we can lay a groundwork with them to keep that place of love within them, then maybe we have a chance. Because right now, I'm afraid that the generations that are the adult generations right now are pretty locked in to where they are. I mean, it's like a greeting card I saw. That's two little 1950s ladies, and they're smoking cigarettes, and one says, "Well, one of us is wrong." And she looks at her friend and she goes, "And the other one's me." They're so locked down. And so I think I have to be honest with you, Paul. I have serious doubts about it myself sometimes, but I have to preach on Sunday. So I got to find a way to share some glimmer of hope with people. And to me, it starts with the next generation and what we can learn from them.
I do think the role of the religious leader right now, finding things to say for people who are so desperate to find it. And it is really, really important. And then, I do think comedians are doing a great job. There are many comedians out there who do a great job. And I was just thinking, when you were talking about the rules for preachers, I interviewed Ira Glass, who has the This American Life. This was a while ago, but he went to hear a rabbi preach. He's not overly religious, but he was and he listened. He was like, "That's our setup." What he's doing is setting up a story and then giving a reveal, and and it was just, we think about, these kind of, new storytelling, but connected with old storytelling. And I remember even at seminary hearing that some of the parables of Jesus had a little bit of a twist that in the time might have been considered a little bit surprising, maybe even humorous. And I think that, this idea of the separation of religion and comedy is obviously a false one. I'm just so appreciative of all you're doing. What haven't we talked about that is very endemic to who you are right now? What would be something that you would want to lift up?
Paul, I love that you are asking about finding common ground. And one of the things I think, especially during this holiday season, that I worry about, I preach about, and I struggle with myself, is making sure to appreciate what I think of as the person on the other side of the line, the person who may be across from you at Starbucks making your coffee, or God forbid, bless them, customer service reps. I think it's so easy because now the anger level in this country is so high. We just channel everything through the phone line against these, for example, customer service reps. And so many people get mad. They're like, "Oh, they don't understand English the way I want them to, blah, blah, blah." Here's my experience with that. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was in Atlanta going through the airport. And as a Southern woman, I can tell the story, right? So I'm sitting there, and there was another Southern belle sitting across from me. She was on her phone, ripping into a customer service rep, and she was like, "Oh my God, I never understand why you can't fix this. Can't you just push a button or something? I mean, I'm about to have myself a conniption fit right up here in this airport." And then,
a conniption fit. I have not heard that for a while. Okay. Yeah.
I picked up the phone, and I was thinking to myself, who is it that doesn't speak English? Right. Here, and there was that understanding, and then you really start realizing that most of the customer service reps who are in other countries are folks like lawyers, doctors who cannot find work, and they're in countries where the literacy rate is way higher than us. So there's moments where I think common ground is about us stepping back and getting a little bit of a reality check on who we are and where we're from, because we do tend to have a little bit of an inflated view. And I think that moment is where we need to go back to, love each other as Christ loved you, as opposed to love each other unless, and here are the 14 caveats.
Well, and I think that's like a really good example because, holiday season, did you say peace, love, joy, and what was the other one? Hope.
Yes.
Well, generally that's not what you're experiencing on the streets of New York, at least in my experience. And everybody is frustrated. And you're like, we went to Thanksgiving and we were, a trip that was supposed to take 3.5 hours took 7 hours. But if we can stop and just like have fun, even when it's not the way that we thought the fun was going to happen. And also, I really think like treating other people, and actually being curious about who you might be talking to, that they have big lives and real lives. And, I think all of that is like just an essential actual spiritual value. And I love like, and if we can also find the humor and share a laugh. I've sometimes like made a little joke with someone on the other end of a service line, and they just appreciate it so much because they are mostly dealing with me in another mood who's like, can I talk to your manager? Like I'm not above it. I'm not pretending like I'm perfect, but when you do actually like take the extra minute to be kind, I think that's great. And
I just will say, I think one thing we forget is that our call or our duty or our responsibility as people of faith to be kind is not just 11 to 12 on Sunday or whenever it is that your religious services or that designated moment. It's all the time. It's throughout. And I love the quote by the Benedictine nun Joan Chittister. She said, we all have the potential to be the human beat of the heart of God. And I think that's so beautiful. And if we realize that potential, then it's a bit daunting, but it's the ability to literally change the relationship of the one-on-one, its ability to change the room, its ability to change the entire community, the world. And that starts with us.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful quote. And by the way, for those who know Sister Joan, she is a funny lady. Like she is not like just floating on air. She can be funny, like, so I love all of this. Reverend Susan Sparks is a preacher, lawyer, and stand-up comedian. She's senior pastor of Madison Avenue Baptist Church in New York City and the best-selling author of books like Laugh Your Way to Grace, Reclaiming the Spiritual Power of Humor, Miracle on 31st Street, and 10 Commandments of Joy. Susan, thank you so much for being here on State of Belief.
Thank you, Paul. It was an honor. I appreciate the invitation. Have a lovely holiday to everyone.
So I want to offer a personal word to you this holy season for me as a Christian. I'm inspired by church last week. We went there and they had something called No Rehearsal Christmas Pageant, which I loved. So everyone in the congregation was able to adorn whatever costume they wanted, whether it was an angel or a shepherd or a sheep, whatever you felt like you were called to. And it was just a really beautiful moment. And the pastor said to us before, she said, you're stepping into the shoes of someone in this story. And what does that feel like? And I thought that was such a nice invitation for us to imagine ourselves in the story. And we're in a story right now, and it's one that is difficult for many of us. I just want to acknowledge this incredibly difficult time for my Jewish cousins and friends and colleagues, this crazy anti-Semitism that is plaguing our country. as well as my Muslim beloved friends who are suffering so much from this spiking Islamophobia, all of which was at terrible levels before the crisis in the Middle East, and now is even worse, spiking, people really being targeted, people hurting. And so I just want to offer us the opportunity to imagine ourselves in other people's shoes right now. Give ourselves the space to listen, the space to hear, the space to engage. And then in this moment where I am hoping to follow the light, a new life, a fragile but hopeful light in the world, that we might move forward and that we might not just think about walking in other people's shoes, but show up for one another in this time, joining one another, refusing to hate, refusing to allow for people who we love, people who we don't know and that we know, to feel hurting right now. So on this sacred time of year for me as a Christian and for my family, I invite all of us, especially Christians, to show up, to reject this Christian nationalist nonsense, dangerous nonsense, and show up for all of those around us who are hurting, people we agree with and people we disagree with. And let us embody peace on earth. And I'll close with, my kids go to a great public school. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the teachers. I'm grateful for public schools. I'm grateful for all that they offer. But one thing they offered in a dance class was something that we now do at night with our two sons, which is we say, peace begins with me. And so in this holy season, I invite you to imagine peace beginning with you and letting it shine to all those around you. And thank you for being with us in this journey. And that's all the time we have for The State of Belief this week. Be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast platform, or at stateofbelief.com/podcast. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. Become a partner in this crucial work by making a financial contribution today. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. And if you're getting something out of the show, and I assume you are, share it with the people in your networks. Let's get more people listening and keep these conversations going on Facebook and Instagram at State of Belief. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I'll be in conversation with Congressman Don Beyer of Virginia, who's been a leading voice for anti-hate and religious freedom legislation since taking office in 2015. And Emmy-nominated actor and best-selling author Rainn Wilson will be with us to talk about his book, Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution, his Baha'i faith, and lots more. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.